Garden, welcome to Garden Grounds. We'll get started in about 1 minute, and I will switch screens and we'll go live. Welcome to the Rusted Garden. So in today's Garden Grounds, I do this every second Thursday and fourth Thursday of the month at 11 o'clock. And it's really, I'm going to present a light topic. Today I'm going to be talking about insect dust, just a couple tips on those. And I'm just going to answer all your questions. You do have to be a subscriber for me to be able to leave a question, but just make sure you type in question before your question, because a lot of people show up in the chat and it can be hard for me to track what's going on. But feel free to put up any question that's related to vegetable gardening and just drop it right into the chat. We'll get started with the first question that's been up here for a couple of minutes. And this is from Eaglet. I used leftover Scott's Lawn Starter fertilizer on my tomatoes. They look fine. NP and K is 20, 27, and 5. Nitrogen is soluble and insoluble. Bad idea. Hold on. Why won't shutting that off? Bad idea or good idea? So chemical fertilizers aren't necessarily going to harm you or your garden or the soil life. So there's nothing wrong with them. Overusing them, not using organic matter, compost, putting into your soil, you can't sustain a garden that way. So not directly related to the question, whatever you're using, organic fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, you 100% need to be putting compost and organic matter into the soil. Fertilizers that we add that are water soluble or insoluble or break down over time, they're just like a vitamin, but they don't really support soil life. You know, organic fertilizer feeds the microbes a little bit, but you must have organic matter. When it comes to this specific fertilizer, it is really high in nitrogen, and you just don't need that much. If you have nitrogen that's too high, you get a lot of lush growth with your plants. They look green, they look great, they get up to a good start. They can overgrow leaves, they can kind of get thin-leaved. It can also bring in more insects because they have this juicy, tender green growth. I just wouldn't use it at that strength. I don't know if you just kind of put some down or you followed the instructions, but I would definitely use that at half strength or quarter strength. And I might only use that in maybe in the fall or the spring or something like that. As switching over to the Miracle-Gro fertilizer, again, the water soluble means it's going to be immediately available to the plant. That's okay to use too, but I would use it at half strength. All the chemical types, Miracle-Gro, Vigoro, Plant Expert, you know, the chemicals that scientists, human beings, chemists make are really high in nitrogen. You can use them at half strength. Just don't overuse them. You just don't need that much. Remember that compost itself is a 1-1-1 NP and K, below that. So your plants just need a consistent supply of NP and K in the soil. They don't need numbers to be particularly jacked up or extra high. And we'll talk again, for those of you that are just rolling in, we're going to be talking a little bit about insect dust as the light topic for today. But go ahead, put your questions out. Just type question before your question so that I can pick it up out of the chat. 23, I have a few watermelon plants in the ground. Some of them are not growing at all. Should I remove them and put it somewhere else? Well, you always want to kind of try and figure out why is it not growing. If it's getting 8 hours of sun, you're watering it regularly, that's perfect. So it has enough sun. If it was in a shady area or something, maybe you do want to move it. You also want to kind of do a check in your head. Have you fertilized the area? Is it rich in compost? If you don't have a lot of compost, did you set up the planting hole? Why might it be struggling? Cold temperatures, depending where you are, can slow it down. Before I would move it, I would use a water-soluble fertilizer like fish emulsion. I recommend AgroThrive as my organic water-soluble fertilizer. You can find that in the video description. And you just want to give it a big drink of water-soluble fertilizer. It's going to be able to pull the nitrogen in right away and see if that helps get your plant off to the start. You also want melons, pumpkins, squash, zucchini in warmer soil. So you do really want 60-degree nights, 70-degree days. So the warmth does make a difference. I wouldn't move them quite yet. I would give them a shot of the water-soluble fertilizer. Thanks for sharing the channel, Crafty. Kim, pepper plants just still look yellow, producing some, but just not looking super green. Maybe waiting on the heat. They're definitely waiting on the heat. And I actually just shot a video last night. It's not out yet. It's going to go out later today, maybe tomorrow morning. And it's what do you do if your pepper plants are kind of yellow, kind of maybe like one fruit on there, not thriving. And it really is weeding, watering, and hitting it with the water-soluble fertilizer. You can't really overfeed a plant with water-soluble fertilizer. I mean, you can if you try really hard, but I would just give them a drink of AgroThrive fish emulsion. You could use the chemical types at half strength. That will give them a jolt of nitrogen. That should help them green up. They're going to start growing leaves out of the leaf joints and stem area, and they should take off. But they are waiting for some warmth coming. If it's been, upper 50-degree nights, 60-degree nights, and you're not really getting into the 40s, that should be plenty warm enough for the peppers. Christina. Hello, I grow a variety of vegetables and fruit. I need to move before August. Can I dig up any of my berry plants, strawberries, asparagus, etc.? Thanks for the advice. You can dig them all up. You can dig up asparagus. You can dig up strawberries. You can dig up the berry plants. You're not going to be able to get a ton of roots, so you want to cut the plants back. So if you have huge canes of raspberries or blackberries, trim them back a little bit. You can try and, move the whole thing over. But when you cut the roots and then you replant, it's up to you if you want to cut it back or anything like that. But when you put them in the ground, remember they're used to having these massive root systems to support all this upper growth. So you're going to want to water just about every day for a good 14 days when you're transplanting like that, especially if it's hot. But they're going to make it. So, worst case is a lot of the upper growth dies back, the roots establish, maybe you get some new canes this year. Next year may not be the best harvest, but they're going to be reestablished and they're going to do okay. Question number 2 from Christina. A few potato plants have wilted. Could it be a fungus? I got a lot of rain in the spring. I've not dug them up. Can the potatoes still be eaten? Well, the good thing about potatoes, if they've been growing for a while, and I'm harvesting some of mine now, you can reach your hand in, see if you can find a potato. If they are wilting and it's not because they're too dry, I mean, if it gets too dry, they're going to wilt. It could be they got some sort of mold or fungus and the potatoes are rotting, but you're not going to really know until you dig in and you kind of look around. Kathleen, I'm trying to recall, do I stop using 5-1-1 fish fertilizer on my tomato plants at some point? So the hard thing with fertilizing is there's no set way to do it. Like, there's no need to continuously fertilize your plants. If they're in containers, you need more regular feeding every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, depending on the size of the plant. It also depends on how you set the soil up. If you're out in your earth beds and you put in lots of compost, you don't have to keep feeding. And I know that's not quite what you're asking. When do I stop using a 5-1-1 fish emulsion? In containers, you're going to have to keep using water-soluble fertilizer. Come July, full growth, fruit production, tomato plants, other plants are just pulling the nutrients out like crazy. So you always have to replace them. If you're talking about in the earth, I usually set my soil up in fall, spring, planting hole, water them in with the water soluble, and then I only really feed them twice. Maybe when stuff is flowering, later on after some fruit production, you could do it a third time, but I don't feed them that often. So I don't know how to answer that for you because I don't know how frequently you're feeding them, but maybe that helps a little bit. I mean, once you get into August and plants are going, I mean, they're really pulling the nutrients out of the ground. I just wouldn't overdo it. Question, what bug is biting my pepper plants and eating the leaves? That I don't know without really seeing a picture, but it can be slugs and snails usually chew the quickest holes overnight and make the biggest holes. G-Rock, and I saw the question. Make sure you do put question in front of it, because if I miss it, you just repost it. Especially if a lot gets going on and I miss your question, please repost it. Gary, do you have any recommendations for a replacement for my holly bush that has thorns or stickers with a fruiting bush? I researched the gumi plant, but really don't know. I've not grown the gumi before. I really like blueberry plants. They grow well. Their leaves change color. That has interest. They produce fruit. I like the currants, Currants, in case you don't understand me. Currants, they're not the best tasting fruit, but they do fruit and they fill out a space really nicely. I'm also growing, let me just see if I can pull it, a gooseberry that doesn't have thorns, and I like that plant. I would kind of recommend those. Gooseberries you have to keep in shape and stuff like that. Blueberries, you would want to get not a low bush. You don't want something, unless you want it growing low to the ground, but just a generic, high bush blueberry. And, if you can, you want 2 different varieties and see what you can do with that. But I love blueberries. Just catching up here. Rod, I dug out a squash vine borer from it and dusted it with 8 dust. Didn't seem to phase it for hours. What else to try? Well, the dust can be slower. And then I'll talk about dust in a second. Sometimes it can take days. Like if you're using an insect dust with a poison in it, like 7 dust, and I think 8 dust has the same chemical, it's usually pretty quick with certain beetles. It can take longer for worms. If you're using neem oil and the worm or caterpillar chews that, it can take 2 to 3 days. If you're using BT, both of those are organic BT and neem oil, it can take 2 or 3 days. So it can take a while. If you dug it out, I would just dispose of it. Vine borers come in, I don't know if it's a moth or a butterfly, but eggs are laid on the stem. The eggs hatch, they burrow into the stem of the squash, they work their way down, they eat the inside of the vine. All of a sudden, one day, your leaves of your squash, zucchini go limp, and you have got this mature vine borer down at the base. Spinosad is an organic dust. Spinosad is the ingredient. Captain Jack's is the company that makes it. And any product that has spinosad is an organic dust. You could try that. I would research the vine borer and just see what kills it. I don't know off the top of my head. But I would also at this point too, like you have the vine borer coming in and they have a life cycle, and eventually the moth goes away or the butterfly goes away, no more eggs are laid. The vine borers do their thing, crawl into the ground and go wherever they go. And then it'll come back next year. I would plant right now another squash or zucchini plant somewhere else in your garden, so that gets growing. This one might die off for the vine borers. And I plant my squash, cucumbers, and zucchini sort of in succession. Every 4 weeks or so, a new plant is going somewhere because the other plants usually get beat up and died off. So let's quickly talk about dusts. So a dust could be diatomaceous earth, which is not an insect dust. It's just silica. It's microscopic organisms from the ocean that died off. They create these microscopic shells, falls to the bottom, that's mined out in dry ocean beds or wherever it comes from. And it's this sharp silica. You put that on your plants. The dust gets into the joints of beetles, grinds the beetle shell down. There's a waxy coat on there or something like that. And then they dry out and they die. So it is a dust, but it's not technically an insect dust. You can use that. It's organic and it's not killing anything by poisoning them or disrupting anything. It grinds the shells down and kills them. Doesn't do much good on worms, caterpillars, or anything like that. Pretty good for beetles. People use it for flea beetles. People use it for cucumber beetle. It has its pros and cons. It's organic. It's safe. Do whatever you want with it. You don't want to breathe it in. Then you get to the insect dusts, which have chemicals, organic or not. Everything in the world is a chemical, by the way. So you have your organic chemicals, which we deem more safe, and then you have chemicals that are created by chemists and people. They are all indiscriminate killers. Sometimes we think an organic dust is only going to kill the insect that we want, but it will kill all insects. So that's the first thing I just kind of want to impress upon people, and we'll talk about the different dusts as we go on. So anytime you're putting a dust down, organic or not, it has the potential to kill bees, pollinators, all the good insects. All right, so I need a second here to find out where I left off. Also, if you do a super chat and that comes up, I will answer that question right away. We're making good time. We still got 30 minutes. I usually stay on from, I don't know, well, it's always at 11, for about 45 minutes at least, and try and answer as many questions as I can. And again, for everybody coming on, I do the Garden Grounds live Q&A every second Thursday at 11 o'clock and every fourth Thursday at 11 o'clock. Eddie, I got behind on my tomato pruning. Now it seems unruly. They have plenty of fruit. I don't want to kill them. Can I still aggressively prune? Yeah, you can always remove. I'll be doing a pruning video soon. I have a lot of them. You can remove leaves from the bottom. If you have a sucker, a sucker, here's a leaf, here's the stem, sucker comes out of the joint, grows leaves, and it grows fruit. You can prune the end of any sucker or production stem and leave the fruit on there to develop. So you can start trimming it back wherever there's not fruit, start to manage it a little bit. There's no exact way to prune. It's more of kind of an art, but you can just look at the plant, where you have fruit and maybe some flowers that are just starting. Maybe you keep those and then you cut the tips of everything else and help, kind of keep it contained. And don't, take maybe out of a whole plant, maybe take 20% of it, let it go for 3 or 4 days, 5 days, and then you can prune it some more. Willow. Willow is also the name of my dog. What is the ratio of compost to soil to use in raised beds? Raised beds I amend with compost did worse than ones amended with bag soil. Should I amend raised beds with soil once a year? So that's a big question. So I do recommend checking out my videos on making your own container mix, using peat moss and store products. You save money, can fill the beds. So here's the problem. If it's your own compost, fully broken down, 90% broken down, well aged, going on 2 years old, you shouldn't have any problem. Now, maybe you did and it was an issue. We'll talk about that. If you're buying bagged compost or you're buying it from somewhere, a lot of times it's not fully composted. It's not broken down. All the bagged composts and stuff are usually garbage. They're not fully decomposed. They're not fully composted. So when you use them in your soil and you mix it and then you plant into it, they are still rotting. They are still breaking down. And in order for them to continue to break down, they have to pull nitrogen from the soil, from your raised bed, and it makes your plants struggle. So if you are doing that or you feel like your compost isn't the best, hit your bed with a water-soluble fertilizer. Get some more nitrogen in there. That will help them out. When you're using compost, you want it to be fully decomposed so that it is broken down into its base components of just whatever, of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, where once you throw it into the ground, it incorporates itself into your bed and then the plants pull it in. So it does depend on the compost you used and how well it was broken down. Next question. Should I amend raised beds with soil once a year? Soil, I'm not sure what you're asking. If your raised beds aren't dropping, like you're not losing the soil, you don't really have to add more soil. Once a year is great to kind of add in maybe you do need some additional soil to raise the level. Once a year is great to throw in some compost on the top, usually like in the fall. I do recommend putting your compost down that you're not, 100% sure it's the best in the fall. Gives it several months to break down and release its nutrients to your ground. So I hope I helped a little bit. And there really is no ratio. The ratio is going to vary based on what your soil is, how much clay it is, the compost you're using, and stuff like that. I like to use like a third of peat, 1/3 earth from my ground, and my ground is heavy clay, and then 1/3 of compost. But the compost I use is mine that I made. Brandon, do your potatoes need any support? I have mine in 100-gallon grow bags, and they tend not to be able to stand up on their own. No, they fall over. You don't need to support them. They look great when they're young and they're coming up and they're green and then they're green and they're big, and then they just kind of flop over. They're going to start to yellow. They normally start to die back, usually towards the end of June. So if you planted potatoes in March, they're pretty much going to be ready over the next couple of weeks. I'm also going to be planting another round of potatoes. So if you missed it, you can use store-bought potatoes. You can plant them in containers, 10-gallon, 20-gallon containers. I sell root pouches, which are perfect for those at my seed shop. And you can grow potatoes through the summer. Now, they need a little bit more water. They're not going to get as big, but a lot of times people think potatoes are just March, April. You harvest, and then you're done. I also plant some later in the season and get baby potatoes late fall. Kim, I have planted some runner beans in a container. Should I be feeding them regularly? If it's in a container, yes. Regularly, as I was saying earlier, is always a tough question. But for containers, you're somewhere every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, depending on the size of the plant. And if your plants in containers ever look like they're struggling, make sure you're staying up on the water, because if you let a container dry out just once, damages the roots. It can't pull in any nutrition. Watering is usually the biggest issue. But then after that, you look at the fertilizer. And you definitely want to be using water soluble, because if you're putting in organic granular and you're working it into the top of the container, that's going to take weeks and months to break down. So the water soluble is immediately available. So bone meal, how long does bone meal take to break down? A long time, not weeks, not months. A good part of a year, if not longer. Bone meal is pulverized, steamed cattle bone. And it's fine, it's broken down into little particles, and it will break down. But it's usually a year. I've done more research on it lately. Some potassium or some phosphorus from the bone meal is available in the beginning, but it takes a really long time to break down. And bone meal would be something you're putting in at the end of the fall. You're letting it break down, and you do that regularly every fall, just to have a supply of a greater supply of phosphorus in there. Rob, what's the best way to get rid of ants, tiny ants? So I have an ant issue in my garden now. I'm going to be doing an ant video. I have videos on it already. Look up borax. Borax is, I'm trying to think, sodium tetraborate. It's a chemical. And we use it in a product called borax. We use it in our laundry. It can be organic. You can find it in nature. People make it. Chemists make it. Ants eat it. It kills them off. It's a really good, safer way to kill ants. And I usually make it off the top of my head, I think, like 4 tablespoons of sugar, 1 tablespoon of borax, add some water. I put it into a mason jar, poke holes in the lid, close it so I don't want my dog getting to it. Drop it where the ants are. They eat it. It kills them off. That's one way to do it. You can also buy ant traps, and you're looking for, I'm pretty sure it's sodium tetraborate. You're looking for that chemical. You don't want any crazy chemicals that you don't know what they are. Sodium tetraborate, I researched, I'm personally okay with, and you can put those traps down. But ants are not good. Like a lot of people say, oh, ants, they aerate the soil. And they do until they become problematic and eat the roots of your plants, disturb the soil so much that the fine roots can't do what they want to do, and they are killing some of my peas. They took out my mustard greens. Ants vary on the species they are. Keep in mind in it. 7 dust works on ants. That's a chemical. There's different things, but I usually start with the borax and see if that works. Harmony, question. Almost at 80-day mark for my potatoes. I have been using 0.1010 more bloom. They're light colored green. I mean, if they still have time to grow, maybe you're going to 100 days, I would give them, a shot of water-soluble nitrogen. You got the potassium, you got the phosphorus in there. And for people who don't know, more bloom is for blooms and really root crops. And it's a 0 nitrogen, no nitrogen, 10 phosphorus, 10 potassium. All right, so then when you get to the dusts, and I'm 95% organic. I will use chemicals that aren't organic when I need to. I'll go down the list of, for instance, for ants, I'll go in first and I'll just disturb the colony. And if that works, great. Then I will go in with the borax, and if that works, great, and it usually does. If I had a group of ants, and sometimes the bigger black ants don't seem to want to eat anything, I will hit them with 7-Dust or something stronger. So I use chemicals differently. You don't have to do it, the way that I do. But I just want to keep in mind what I was saying earlier. You have your organics. Spinosad is usually the dust for organic gardening. And then you have something like 7-Dust and other dust. I don't like the other dust. I don't understand what they are. I researched 7. I'm okay with that. What I want to impress upon you is how to use them. Whatever one you pick, if you go and you douse the whole plant at like 10 a.m. and you hit every leaf and you get dust particles everywhere and you get it on the flowers, you're going to kill out everything. Anything that's susceptible to spinosad and 7 will die out. You want to dust strategically, meaning for cucumbers, when they have the cucumber beetles, you don't have to cover every leaf. Cover, 6 maybe of the outer leaves. If you have a big plant, maybe 8 of the outer leaves away from the flowers. At night, the cucumber beetles will run through it. It kills them really quickly. You're going to see them on the leaves. Leave it there if you want. When I use a dust on my eggplant, I put it on late at night. If it doesn't have flowers, I don't worry about it. But once it flowers, I put it on late at night. When the pollinators go away, I come out early in the morning, I rinse it off. That will kill the flea beetles. Organic, chemical dust, use it the same way. When I'm using it on the vine borer or squash and stuff for like the vine borer, I will put it on the outer leaves, hopefully for squash bugs, but dust seems to not really bother squash bugs. I will put it along the stem at the base of the cucumber plants or the squash plant or the zucchini plant, but I'll remove the flowers. So the whole key is keeping the dust away from the flowers where the pollinators go. And you have to be really, really careful. And the best way to do that, if you're really worried, you dust late at night when the sun's almost down. You come out in the morning, you rinse it off, and then you protect your pollinators. Brick. I struggle with the balance between covering for pests and uncovering for pollination. My blueberries, strawberries, squash, zucchini are covered at the moment. Any suggestions? No, it's a tough problem to deal with. Like, I don't mind some damage in my garden, and I plant in a way that I'm always putting in new plants with respect to squash, zucchini, and cucumbers. Strawberries, you can't really necessarily plant new ones. Same with blueberries. Blueberries, I don't know what pest pressure you're getting, but definitely you can get bird issues. I don't have that. Strawberries, you can have bird issues. If it's damage to strawberries from snails and slugs, I use a slug bait with iron phosphate or sulfur in it. But I don't really have, a solution for you. Squash and zucchini are going to need the pollinators. What I would do is just, you got them in now. Maybe you have to cover them now because you have greater pest pressure. Maybe you have to hand pollinate or, take it off for a period of time while you're out there. Keep an eye out for flying butterflies and moths. Cover them back up. But at some point, you're going to get to the point in the season where the vine borer and pests leave your squash and zucchini alone. So you want to have a plan to be putting in new plants Maybe you put some in July 1st, and then you put some in August 1st. If you're in a warm area like Maryland, I can grow all the way into the beginning of October. And by the time October, or by the time later summer comes, a lot of the pests that cause issues are gone in my garden. And make sure if you're putting out a question, you put question in front of it, please. The chat's getting pretty big, so I'm just trying to find where I left off here. And again, we'll go for at least another 15 minutes. If you have a question I haven't gotten to or you're concerned, I will answer super chats right away. And some of you might notice people names are in green. They have a star next to it. That's perk members. They're perk members. I've been doing that for maybe almost 2 years or something. I'm not sure. But I do this Q&A format 4 or 5 times a month. I do a live class once or twice a month. And I do a series called Grow as We Grow, which will actually be out tomorrow, where perk members send me in their videos. I incorporate them in with a video of mine, and we kind of show off the gardens and what's going on. But you can become a perk member by going to the YouTube channel. There should be a join button. YouTube doesn't always make it easy, but find the join button and you can become a perk member. Okay, so yeah, there are a lot of questions. I'll see if I can get through them quickly. ND, my Chicago fig is on its second year. Unlike last year, it's thriving as far as growth. No fruit yet. Any suggestions for nudging it along? Any tips for good ground cherry harvest? I don't have any tips for a ground cherry harvest. Chicago hardies, if a lot of the upper wood survived, you may get a light cropping of figs right now. And my figs, I have 3 of them, 3 Chicago hardies. And, maybe there's, I don't know, 12 on each plant or something like that. They're 5 years old. The big harvest isn't really going to come until later July, August. And in the joints of the stem and the leaf, you should see little buds. And those little buds are future figs. So the Chicago hardy really puts out the figs after June. So they're coming. Christina, I have a huge earwig infestation in my garden. They come every year, June, September, devastating. Beans, leafy greens. I would use a dust, earwigs. People are like, you're pushing 7. It's carbamol, I think, is the ingredient. You can find it everywhere. I probably said it wrong, but it's CARBAMYL. That's the active ingredient. It kills things fast. If I got to the point where I had an infestation and everything's being wrecked, and I've tried what I can try, I will hit it with 7 late in the evening, rinse it off in the morning. That will knock back an infestation of earwigs. I would also try spinosad first. That is the organic version. I would dust the plants and, wait a couple days, dust it again, try and get them under control. I find for earwigs, dusts work best. I don't get them often, but, I have before. And people say dusts work better. Chewing caterpillars, chewing worms seem to be controlled best by neem oil and BT. And then, the thing with chemicals is organic gardening really got screwed up with the commercial industry. They're trying to tell you everything is organic. If it doesn't have a stamp, it's going to kill you. And that's wrong. And it's really expensive. Like you used to be able to buy, I'm going to go on a tangent. I'll stay on a little bit longer. 50-pound bags of blood meal and 50-pound bags of bone meal for like $20. And that was really before organic caught on and everybody was, made fearful of using the chemical fertilizers. And now, it's really expensive to buy 3 pounds of blood meal. It's like $9 to $12. Commercial industry got a hold of it. If you're ever trying to save money, look at feed stores and farm stores and try and buy ingredients in bulk. And anyway, for those of you who don't know what blood meal is, it's pig blood, slaughterhouse pig blood dried down. Bone meal is cattle bone, I believe, maybe other bones too, but they take the bones of slaughtered animals, steam them, crush them, and now you've got bone meal and blood meal. Anytime you see the word meal, it's usually code for ground up animal parts in some capacity. So yes, it's organic, but I don't necessarily think it's better than a chemical fertilizer. With the qualifier is that the strength of your garden isn't going to come by which organic granular or water soluble or chemical water soluble you use. It's going to come from making your own compost that saves you money, or getting compost from a reliable source, and really making beautiful soil for the microbes to grow, for the root systems to grow. The fertilizers are really an afterthought. If you're using compost, you can get rid of all the organic granular. You don't really need that anymore. You're probably always going to need a water soluble for planting and helping plants that are, struggling a little bit, and you're going to definitely need it for container gardening. Anyway, all things are chemicals. Just keep in mind how you're spending money, what you're buying, and just learn about the product. Don't take my word for it. Learn about what you want to use in your garden and just have a plan. Organic, 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 and then infestation, maybe you try something harsher. There's nothing wrong with that. All right, so whenever I go on a tangent, I see there's a super chat I'll answer in a second too. I lose track of the original question I was answering. Maybe I just saw somebody was talking about chemicals. Young, does natural work well on gnats? So I'm not sure what natural is, but it might be a BT, a natural organic way to control. It's like mosquito dunks. If that's what it is, yes, it does work. It doesn't necessarily work on the adult gnats, but it works on the larvae that are crawling through the soil. All right, let me get the super chat. Bags. Can you have too many drain holes in a bucket? My water runs out pretty quickly. Also, my fertilizer runs down into my wicking bucket. Is that normal? You could, for what you explained. And in that case, you always need drainage holes, and it's better to have more, because a container that fills up with water and doesn't drain, it's going to quickly root rot your plants. The water fills the air pockets in the soil and problems happen. What I do is, when I used to grow in 5-gallon buckets, I actually cut my holes 1 inch from the bottom, and I'll put in really like one big one, like a dime size, and maybe one on the other side. That's plenty. That'll let all the water out. It also leaves a reservoir for when the plants are bigger, water sits down there, saves you a little bit of a headache if things get dry. If you have really well-draining soil and you feel like your fertilizer is running out, you might want to just switch. I'll just give you the general idea. Say you're watering every 2 weeks with the water soluble, and then you water and you feel like it's running out. Water more often at a reduced strength. This way, the fertilizer stays in the soil better. Meaning, instead of just doing it once a month or every 2 weeks at a full concentration in a gallon of water, dilute your waterings down, if possible, to maybe feedings to like once a week with just a light feed. Or after you've watered and the water's run through, and it's going to be like a day or two before you water again, before you water again, then hit them in the evening with the water soluble and just let that seep in, but not drain out. If you're watering a gallon of water soluble into a container and it's flushing out, you're just wasting the fertilizer. And bags, feel free to ask if you need some clarity on that. And it is kind of normal. Like, stuff is going to wick down, is going to go right to the bottom really quickly. And I appreciate the super chat. All right. All right, Susie, what caused my tomato plant started from seed to curl and form bald leaves at the top? It can be a lot of things. If you're using chemical sprays to kill weeds, a light drift can cause distortions. You can have insect damage at the tips, and that can cause distortions. You can have a change in weather where it got really cold, and that can cause problems. But it's hard to say. That's like the number one question that there's always 3 answers to. I would just keep an eye on it. And I would don't pull out all the suckers from the joints of your plants. Maybe you have some, the growing tips are damaged. Let new suckers form, which will turn into production stems. They will grow flowers, they will grow fruit, and see how they look. I have a huge, oh, we did that one. All right, good thing I missed the question I just answered. Natural. My cucumber leaves from Mary Lou. My cucumber leaves have beige spots on them. They don't have any bugs or eggs on them. They look like army camouflage. The leaves are thin and turning brittle. Yeah, that is usually an issue if you turn your leaf over, all in the joints where you see all the veins. An insect gets in there and eats them. You can start getting a fungus that causes a problem. But that's when I usually spray with a peppermint oil on the undersides of the leaves. And if you really take that leaf and look at it, you've got something on the undersides chewing the leaf, creating on the top that army kind of camouflage look. And again, for that I usually use peppermint oil. Without seeing it, though, I think you're describing it pretty well. It could be a fungus. It could be an insect chewing. So peppermint oil for the insect, and then an antifungal to coat the underside and top sides of the leaves to prevent a fungus spread. Toaster, I saw your question, but make sure you guys put question in front. Can you top dress tomato and peppers with year-old horse manure? You can top dress if it's 100% 1 year old, meaning if it was dropped in July or earlier, you're waiting at least until July again. You're not just waiting a season, like end of the summer manure and then beginning of the summer you're using that manure. You need a good 12 months. And because you're putting it on top, you're not mixing it into the root system. The roots are going to go down, and then as it rains and microbes will mix with that manure and you'll be okay. William Kennedy, have you developed a way to prevent the alum leaf miner? The larva decimated my garlic this year. No. But I did, in this case, use the 7 dust on them. Well, let me restate that. Last year, I had leaf miners in the stems of my onions. I put 1 day's worth of 7 dust on there. Nothing seemed to be working. It killed them back. This year, I got root maggots, and it really wrecked a lot of my garlic and my onions, although some is coming back. Spinosad or 7 dust on the soil helps kill the larva, My point is that I think you're going to have to use spinosad or a chemical dust, coat the leaves, coat the earth. And a lot of us don't like to do that. And I understand. And you don't have to. I mean, you could try neem oil. I don't think that's going to work. But once we get an infestation, like the root maggots will always be coming back to my garden. They come in, flies lay eggs on the stems. They go down to the bottom. They do their thing. You have to learn what insects are showing up, and you have to find the right treatment for that. If not, it's going to keep coming back. But there's no secret way. And if there was like this beautiful organic way and this perfect companion planting of the secret plant to plant with our plants, we would all know that by now. Like, it would be everywhere. I wish that was true. There's a lot of lore and myth and love for like the perfect balance of nature and everything's taken care of. One thing to keep in mind is a garden is not a natural part of the ecosystem. You're putting all these lush plants in that insects love, and you're getting good insects and bad insects, and they're doing their thing, but the good insects don't really multiply and become a bigger population until after you get an infestation of a problematic insect. And, you can go with that, but you're going to have crop loss. And for some people it works. For some people it doesn't. Super chat. Outlier. Which apple variety of the 31 planted in Tom Spellman's low chill hour experiment in Irvine did not do well? I did not find it in your video. Well, this is more like a quiz. I appreciate the super chat. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think I covered that in my video. I don't know if you're thinking of somebody else, but I didn't do a video related to that. I'm curious to what it was, and for those of you that don't know, is apples need to have a lot of the fruits need chill hours, and it can't be below 32 degrees, and I can't remember, it can't be like, I don't know, above 43 degrees, but you need this certain range of chill so that the plant basically resets and it's ready to flower and fruit the following year. So you need a cold period. I apologize, I can't answer your question. I'm so sorry. Rod, tomatoes that have set fruit are dropping blooms. Newer succession planted tomatoes are setting. So it seems heat is not causing the bloom drop. I mean, you're not going to really know. I mean, if the plants look green, they look healthy, weird fluctuations are coming with your weather. Maybe you've had some days where the sun is pounding down at the root system and it's gone from cool to really hot quickly, and the plant hasn't had time to slowly adjust from like 60 to 70 to 80 degree days. They could drop blooms. Blooms are usually dropped because the plant's protecting itself. They feel like they can't produce because it's too hot. Maybe there's not enough water. There's a little bit of drought, and they drop blooms. But I would just stick with consistent watering. Maybe give them a little bit of a water soluble, nothing crazy, just to give them some nutrients. But keep an eye on it. In Maryland, at some point, I'm going to put shade cloth down to keep my plants, my peppers and tomatoes, from dropping blooms. Holly, besides texture, how do you know if and when your compost is broken down and it is good? That is a really good question, and it is usually by texture. It should have really no odor to it. It should smell like a beautiful forest, earthy, but no smell to it whatsoever. And it should be really fine brown particles, nice and dark, rich smelling, and that's how you know your compost is done. And you shouldn't be able to identify it. Like if it's, leaves, the leaves should be so broken down that you can't tell it was leaves. So you can't tell what it was when it gets to that point. Nina, who is a perk member, I've been feeling a bit overwhelmed with what I want to get done in the garden. How do you plan out what you will do in the garden on a given day? And how much do you usually accomplish? Well, I usually accomplish it all within about an hour. No, I'm just kidding. It's a never-ending process. So you, first of all, work within the time that you have, because we all have lives. As you accomplish something, you pause to look at what you've accomplished. You give yourself credit, and then you just move yourself, the stuff on your list, to the next day. It's just really not possible to do it all. I don't really have a plan written down, but I focus on watering and pest management at this point. And then as I have time, I'm putting in new plants and stuff like that. But I want to be able to take care of what I'm growing currently, middle of June, well before I start adding in lots of other things. But I don't have a plan, and I always, I don't feel like I've accomplished everything. I just cut down some trees to open up the space. They're laying on the ground. They'll probably lay there 3 or 4 days before I get to them. But, I just kind of go with what needs the most care at that time. Big. I make my compost in one large batch in spring to use the following spring. This year I seem to have an issue with a twisted or curvy leaf on 4 or 1 tomato types. All other plants are fine. Yeah, I mean, the curvy leaves, again, can be drift from a chemical spray, weed killer, anything. It just needs a little bit. It can be insects chewing the tip. Could be temperature. We never really know. If your compost was all made with non-treated product, it's not from your compost, but it is possible that you put down a chemical in your yard to kill weeds, you cut the grass, you used it. Possible. It's possible that if you buy straw or hay from somewhere. Hold on. From somewhere that it had a chemical on there. But that's rare. So I don't know exactly what's doing that. But it happens sometimes. Every once in a while, I'll have like 15, 20, 30, sometimes 40 tomato plants. And one or two will get this distorted leaf thing. I will use like weed killer when I'm killing weeds that are in the joint of my fence, and I'm not going to spend an hour hand weeding. But it's usually really far away from the tomato that has a problem. So it wasn't that, but it just shows up and you get twisted leaves. Oh, all right. So it's 11:50. So I blew by the 11:45. So I'm going to make a hard stop at 12. Question: thoughts on making your own organic fertilizer using leftover fish bones, fish heads, and a blender to make emulsion? That would work. It's a lot of work, and you have to let it rot. And I am going to be doing a video on burying fish heads and old bananas, eggs, etc. You can do a compost hole. A compost hole is really nothing more than composting. And you're digging down at least 12 inches. You're putting in the fish head. You're putting in the banana peels, the expired eggs or whatever. Break the egg. Fill it over. It just rots in there. It's going to decompose. And you would do that regularly, you know, just over time. And eventually the stuff you put in June will be ready in September. Stuff you put in September will be ready next spring. And it's a way to compost without having the big pile and stuff like that. If you're going to make it yourself and you're going to blend it all together, you really do have to let it rot and decompose. And it's god-awful smelling. It's going to attract flies. It's going to be a mess. And at the end of the day, how much time and energy did you put into making that versus maybe buying fish emulsion or just going to the compost hole and dropping the fish heads in when you can just walk away and be done with it? So it's really up to you. Like if it's something you think you would enjoy, it's possible. It's just going to be, you have to let it rot. So you can't just blend up everything and then pour it on your soil. If you do that too, it's also going to bring tons of animals to your space. Okay. Hold on, the chat's messed up. All right, 8 minutes left. Yeah, I'm not going to get to everybody's questions, so I apologize. But I do, just to recap, I do the live Garden Grounds, what we're doing today, every second and fourth Thursday at 11 o'clock, usually 45 minutes to an hour. I usually end up staying on for a whole hour. So Dan says, I have a huge ant problem. They have at least 5 anthills on 4.5 acres. So outside, away from my garden, you know, I will get ant granules and I'll just kill the nest because it is a problem. You can do things like people say, take, you know, some ants from one colony, put it to another. They'll neutralize each other. You can do the borax trick that I talked about earlier in the video. Or earlier in this live. Just go to my channel, look up borax and ants. It'll show you how to make a sugar bait with borax that you use for detergent. That works. I usually, just to clarify, like if I have ants in my growing beds, then I treat them more organically and safely. If I have the huge ant colonies that are, you know, killing out my lawn, I will treat them with other stuff. Scott, if your blueberry bush isn't green and blooming now, all my blueberries have already set flowers. They're I'm picking blueberries. Your blueberry's probably dead. You can tell that if you bend the twig and it snaps and it's dry, all that is dead. Doesn't mean the roots are necessarily dead. Maybe it'll send up some new growth, but I would be suspect. So my phone is on silent, but it keeps going, so I've screwed something up. So I apologize for that interruption. Elizabeth, I've never dealt with Japanese beetles. I find them on my green beans that are trellising over my cattle panels. Diatomaceous earth isn't really that effective with um, Japanese beetles. It will impact bees if the dust gets on the bees. Um, for Japanese beetles, what I found best really is to get the Japanese beetle traps that have pheromones, hang them somewhere in your garden. They go to that, you don't necessarily want to attract them to your garden, but they're already there. Or put them outside the garden. It's probably better away. They will go to that. You bag them, you throw them away. When I see them on my plants, they don't bite, they don't have teeth. I grab them and I just remove them. I will also put spinosad dust, insect dust, your choice, on the outer leaves. It's kind of tougher with green beans because flowers are everywhere. That does work on them. Diatomaceous earth, I just found, didn't seem to work that well on Japanese beetles. Linda, usually after you give anything a water-soluble fertilizer, fish emulsion, or other, really within 3 to 5 days, you should see stuff starting to green up. I do not pick the flowers off of my potatoes, Karen. I just let them go. Can slugs get on the leaves that are high on the tomato pepper plant? It's possible. I mean, they're probably not necessarily going to climb 4 feet high, but they can move pretty quick for a slug and get up there. Heather, I need to get tomatoes in the holes I dug out, but forgot what goes in the holes. Compost, organic granular, lime, worm castings. Well, all of the above you can use. In a planting hole, it's basically what you're doing is you're taking out the earth and then you're mixing it 50-50 with a good compost. Works fine. Once you mix that together, if you want to put on a tablespoon of organic granular, that's fine. You don't need lime unless maybe you're adding some peat moss in there to hold moisture. And worm castings are optional. That's just really up to you. But really loosening up the soil, adding in the compost, and just giving it a nice growing base is the key. All right, 4 minutes. Karen, last year I grew a beautiful crop of beets. This year they developed leaves but stopped growing at about 2 inches tall. Could this be due to our warmer than usual weather? I mean, possible. My beets grow through the summer, so it gets hot here. I would just give them a great watering, stay up on the watering, give them a feeding of any water-soluble fertilizer right now. I would also try and gently tug one up, and if it pulls out of the ground and the root system isn't great, you might have something eating the roots. If you kind of pull it up and it's, attached to the earth, so to speak, or it's really hard to pull the beet up, then the root system is okay. Have you gotten a chance to try peppermint castile water mixture on the lanternfly nymphs? If so, did it work? Worked for me, but I had to hunt and spray each one. So I haven't tried it yet. I'm going to be spraying my cucumber plants with the peppermint oil, so I'll give it a try. However, the last part of your statement is really important. When I see them, I have thousands of lanternfly nymphs around. So I'm actually putting dusts on my muscadines, which are like grapes, and on my grapes because they are so mixed into the leaves and it's so dense that, spraying just isn't going to work. I do take a walk around my property and I can see them clustering on the tree of heaven in places. So I will hit them with the peppermint spray when I go out there, but I'm using 2 different methods. I just saw, I'm actually a Leo on the cusp. I think Libra's next, so I'm right on the cusp. Why I know that, I don't know, but I am. Can I use liquid 7 and will be the same purpose as dust? Yeah, 7 dust is better for insects that are moving around. The spray is better to contact the leaves, and once it contacts the leaves, it's not going to be blowing around to the flowers and possibly hitting good insects. If the animal is chewing the leaf, then they're chewing the spray, the chemical, and that usually kills them. So they're used, in my opinion, a little bit differently. Don't have a way of getting rid of ticks. A tomato plant can take anywhere from breaking the surface, germination, or a transplant as little as 55 days, but up to like 85 days. So it takes a while. You should start seeing flowers soon. All right. I have to wrap up because I have to get back on my garden chore list. So I will be back in 2 weeks, Thursday at 11 o'clock for Garden Grounds. If you're interested in this format, I would recommend checking out perk memberships on my YouTube channel. It's, like $7 or $8 a month. You get 4 or 5 of these sessions and some other things. And it's really focused on just helping answer your questions and helping you have a better experience in the garden. So I will see all you guys next time.